We've reached the 1 o'clock mark that we've set to start this webinar. So we want to, for the sake of your time, go ahead and get this started. We want to thank you for joining us today for our webinar on unemployment benefits and resources. And we will begin with Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for agreeing to participate in a session on unemployment benefits. And certainly want to thank our members for reaching out to your constituents and spreading the word about this particular session. And so we want to make certain that this is a great session, that you learn a lot from it, and this information that you're able to take and then educate others in your areas. And so again, thank you for participating, and I will turn it back over to the moderator.
Thanks. First up, we have Secretary Fitzgerald Washington. We want to thank you for taking time out of, we know, your busy schedule to join us today to provide the constituents with the resources available from the Alabama Department of Labor. Now I'll turn things over to you.
First off, let me say good afternoon. I really appreciate Representative Anthony Daniels for this opportunity to update this group on what ADOL is doing to help so many people during this crisis. The situation we find ourselves in is full of uncertainty, as well as more positive cases as the coronavirus is announced. You know, from an employer perspective, layoffs are occurring by the day, which is affecting the livelihoods of people not only in Alabama, but around the world. The U.S. unemployment rate for March is 4.4%, which increased almost a full percentage point from the 3.5% rate in February. As we reported last month, Alabama's February unemployment rate held steady at 2.7%, which was the same rate in January of this year and December of 2019. We do announce the March unemployment rate this Friday, where I do anticipate an uptick in the rate from our historic rate we've been experiencing in recent months. Now let me touch on the CARES Act program that President Trump signed into law on March 27th. The $2 trillion package provides additional relief for more groups impacted by COVID-19. Now, one of the areas all states have been challenged with is the fact that the federal government has been slow to give guidance on how the programs in the CARES Act should be and should be administered. So I'm going to cover with you the key programs in the Act and a brief description of the relief for each one of them. First is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, or PUA. This program provides unemployment benefits to those not ordinarily eligible for them. These include individuals who are self-employed, nonprofits, gig economy workers, churches, or contract employees. These groups do not currently contribute to the UI Trust Fund, but we needed to put together a path on how they should apply for those benefits. This week we released more instructions on how these groups can apply for those benefits. We have detailed instructions listed on our website, which is labor.alabama.gov, which is currently on our file. Alabamians who file for benefits may receive a notice that they are ineligible for benefits, even though they may still be eligible. All claimants will receive a document in the mail, and the document should be completed with the required documentation as soon as possible for the claims to be processed. In the instructions, self-employed Alabamians are to enter their name as their employer and use the address or business address in the profile box. Self-employed individuals will need to file weekly claims for each week or partial week they are unemployed. We will be able to pay all those eligible weekly benefits retroactively. The next program is the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Program, or FPUC. This program provides $600 per week to an individual eligible for unemployment compensation. So what you'll have is some folks will qualify for the maximum $275 unemployment compensation weekly benefit amount, and also the $600 week stimulus benefit. which totals $875 per week. Now, for comparisons, in the state of Texas, their max unemployment compensation weekly benefit amount is $521. So when you add up the $600 weekly stimulus, you're at $1,121 per week. You know, Alabama was one of the first 5 states that pulled the trigger on paying the stimulus once we received guidance. I certainly want to make sure everybody understands that. We were, in our state, was one of 5 states, again, to pull the trigger on getting people their stimulus checks. And the final program is called the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, or PEUC, which allows for an additional 13 weeks of benefits added to the end of regular unemployment benefits. Now, what that means is claimants may collect unemployment benefits for a longer period of time than under normal circumstances. A full listing of all of our qualifications and resources, again, can be found on labor.alabama.gov. You know, one of the most discussed elements of the stimulus package has been the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Program, which provides an additional $600 a week in benefits. The additional $600 weekly benefit will only be available beginning the week of March 29th through July 31st. You know, the current concerns I've heard from some employers is that the $600 weekly stimulus will give some workers an automatic wage increase, and if the employer resumes operations, would that discourage those workers from returning to work? Now, we do have an administrative rule called the refusal of suitable employment, which means if the employer resumes operations and the employee refuses to return to work, the employer notifies ADOL through the new hire report process, and the employee becomes ineligible and the benefits are stopped. Now, again, just a reminder, the $600 weekly stimulus expires on July 31st. Our staff has been receiving and responding to a lot of questions, a lot of technical questions that can't be answered by a quick yes or no. Now, in most cases, we have to review the new guidance from USDOL and then compare it to our own state rules. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Question 1, can a claimant who has an overpayment use their $600 weekly stimulus to reimburse us for an overpayment? The answer is yes. So if an individual owes, let's just say $200 in overpayments, they can use the $600 weekly stimulus to pay the overpayment amount. The maximum amount that can be reimbursed for an overpayment is 50% of the $600 weekly stimulus. Here's another question. I have more than one job. I lose one to COVID-19. Can I still draw benefits? The answer is only if your earnings are less than your regular UC weekly benefit amount, which again is $275 a week in terms of a maximum benefit amount. Third question, if an employer receives unemployment benefits as a result of a coronavirus business shutdown, will the employer's unemployment taxes increase? The answer is yes. The employer's charges will be waived to weeks claimed due to COVID-19 until further notice. Employers are urged to file partial claims or bulk claims on the employee's behalf. This certainly expedites the claim process. Now I'm gonna shift gears just a little bit and give you some quick facts on initial claim filings. There were 73,000 claims taken last week alone, approximately 98,000 claims filed the prior week. And how about 11,000 claims filed just yesterday? As you can see, based on this data, you can see there has been a surge of layoffs across our state. There's also has been more than 306,000 claims filed in the last 4 weeks compared to 130,000 claims filed all of last year. That's 176,000 increase in claims just over a 4-week period. ADOL has paid out over $188 million in claims over the same time period and $120 million in stimulus relief since last Wednesday. Currently, we have almost $700 million in our UI trust fund to pay our claims. Just as a reminder, payments will be made to direct deposit accounts or an ADOL issued debit card. It may take up to 21 days, but it should generally be sooner. Direct deposit is the fastest method to receive those benefits. Debit cards will add an additional 5 to 7 days before payments can be made. So, some important improvements we've made over the last few weeks at our agency. One is we moved our UI claimant portal to a cloud-based system, which has sped the frequency for claim filers. We've already seen a vast improvement by doing so. Secondly, we've made changes to our partial filings or mass filing system. Before, employers, when filing on behalf of their employees, had to list each individual name before submission. Now, employers would just send us a one-file spreadsheet and we can export those files into our system. You know, something that we're really excited about is the rollout of our new unemployment claims tracker. In fact, we pulled the trigger on that today. It went out today with instructions. Now, what this unemployment claims tracker will do would allow a claimant to track their claims from the initial filing time and get constant updates on their claims until their benefits arrive. It'll have some basic questions in it. And let's just say if some information has been entered incorrectly, it'll notify you and let you know that you need to go back and get that information correctly before the claim can be processed fully. You would be surprised that a number of calls that we've gotten are from claimants. And again, claimants who have not done this before, who have not put in social security numbers correctly, even, let's just say, misspelled their names. And so those have been pushed back until that information is corrected. We've also repurposed 150 Career Center essential staff personnel to assist with the surge of calls. As I've mentioned before on some other webinars, we restricted public access to our career centers, but our essential career staffers are actually working inside the career centers, responding to calls, as well as taking some pressure off of the calls that are coming into our call center. And then lastly, I'm excited to announce that I signed a MOU with a call center vendor just yesterday, and they will start operations on Monday, again, to assist with the demands and calls that we're receiving. We see these enhancements as major improvements for both the employer and the claim filers. Please know, we realize that there's a lot of tension for those who have been laid off through no fault of their own, and the process has been slow to get the financial relief to them. Again, I mentioned a lot of that has to do with when we receive guidance from USDOL on how we administer these programs. And I certainly understand those concerns from so many people that have been having some difficulty in getting their claims filed. Just know that our staffs are working tirelessly to meet the demands to process those claims. We continue to ask patience from our claim filers as we are making necessary adjustments as we navigate through this crisis. So finally, I'll say this, I'm confident that Alabama will rise above this crisis and be a stronger and better state than ever before. Now, for those who have some additional questions or need questions answered, I certainly want to direct everybody to our website, which is labor.alabama.gov, and then click on the COVID-19 resource page, as it is being updated constantly with new information on available resources as we get them. So that's my update.
Thank you, Secretary Washington, for being with us and providing that valuable information. I will give the mic over to Senator Singleton now. He does have a question and for his opening remarks.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you, Leader Daniels, and for this phone call, and thank you, Mr. Washington. Mr. Washington, I got on a little late. I think I had a concern with you just the other day about people who had overpayments, who are trying to file into the system, and they are being rejected. Have we cleared that up yet and found a way that those people who have overpayment, that where the money may be able to take out of the stimulus check to meet the overpayment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that question to my attention the other day. And in fact, I addressed it earlier. So I repeat to you what I've already shared with this group. So the question is, can a claimant who has an overpayment use their $600 weekly stimulus to reimburse for the overpayment? The answer is yes. So let's just say if there's an individual that owes $200 in an overpayment, they can use the $600 weekly stimulus to pay that overpayment. The maximum amount that can be reimbursed for overpayment is 50%. So the maximum is $300. Anything above $300 of the stimulus, the claimant or the individual will have to pay that piece.
I'll follow up. What has been happening is that those persons who owe have been directed to overpayment and department, and when they try to go into overpayment, they're not being able to get any connection either through the web in or on the phone. They're rejecting them out of the system. Has that been up to this date?
Yeah, we're working on that right now through some of the moves, some of the improvements that I just mentioned. Again, we've already hired and ordered in a call center group that will take on some of the surge of calls. So I just suggest them to go back to the system and try to get re-entered. They'll also be able to use our UC or unemployment claims tracker to find out where the disconnect's in with their claim. So again, let's just say they entered some information incorrectly. Before, you wouldn't be able to know that. Now you will be able to, so you can go back and make those corrections to move the process through.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will let all of our viewers know, we do see your questions in the chat and we will address them as the presentations end. So now we will turn things over to our next speaker, who is Robert Lockwood, who is with Wilmer and Lee, PA.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me speak with you today. Again, my name's Robert Lockwood. I practice employment law in Huntsville, and so basically what that means is generally my job, I represent employers and helping them to address their legal issues of all kinds arising out of their employment relationships. And the good news is that employers really do care about their employees in Alabama. And I've gotten so many calls from my employer clients asking me ways that they can try and help with the unemployment system, either to educate their employees or help their employees out to the maximum extent possible with unemployment benefits in this time. So I've gained some knowledge of the CARES Act and the provisions that it applies. And honestly, Secretary Washington has already covered a lot of my material today. But before I get going, I really do want to take a minute to really praise Secretary Washington and praise his staff for the job they've been doing. I mean, look, I know this isn't easy for anybody who's been laid off or furloughed and you're concerned about your families. And you want to have your claim processed. But the just flood of new claims that has hit the Department of Labor is just amazing. And to hear the updates that he gave us today, particularly with regard to the unemployment claims tracker, the call center, I mean, it's clear that he and his department are really working for the best interests of the unemployed in Alabama. And I do want to take a minute to say thank you to him as I get going. So let's go on ahead and go to the next slide. And these are sort of generally the four main areas that if you take nothing away from my presentation today, I hope you remember these four numbers. First of all, generally, if you're entitled to unemployment benefits in Alabama, you can get up to $275 a week maximum. And then you've got the extra benefits that are being provided by the federal government. Like Secretary Washington said, if you're eligible under any of these programs, you'll get $600 a week. And then the other programs, if you've exhausted your regular unemployment, you can get 13 extra weeks of unemployment, even though you've exhausted your regular benefits under Alabama law. And then, like he said, I mean, others that normally wouldn't qualify for unemployment at all now get up to 39 weeks. And potentially that can be tacked on to your 13. So the federal government has really laid out a massive program for helping the unemployed. And again, just think of everything that the Department of Labor is going through to really implement these massive programs with virtually no guidance from the federal government. So those are your big numbers: 275, 600, 13 weeks, and 39 weeks. So let's talk about that a little more. Go to the next slide, please. So here's just a little bit about just generally unemployment benefits in Alabama. Like I said, the maximum is $275 a week. They're administered by the Alabama Department of Labor, and like Secretary Washington said, they've got a list of questions and answers online that they update regularly. One of the questions was on there is, do I qualify if COVID-19 causes my employer to shut down? And the answer on there is maybe, but I think more than anything, it's most likely they will. And then they've given you a definitive answer that if you yourself are ill or caring for a family member that's ill with COVID-19, you will qualify for unemployment benefits. And significantly, if you're already receiving unemployment compensation, you don't even have to file a new claim related to COVID-19. You're already in the system, and hopefully, I think last Friday, they started paying out the $600, and I hope that's already flowing to some of you who already have it. But if you are receiving sick leave, vacation, or PTO from your employer, then odds are you're probably not entitled to benefits. And as Secretary Washington mentioned, normally if an unemployment claim is filed, it affects the amount of unemployment taxes an employer has to pay, but the state has generously waived that during this COVID-19 crisis. Next slide, please. All right. Now, this is one of the most interesting parts of unemployment law in Alabama, and it's what we call partial unemployment. And this really comes about where an employer is really trying to help their employees out as much as possible, but suffered a loss in business. So maybe you're a 40-hour employee, and now your employer says, well, we don't have any business because of COVID-19. I can only keep you here 20 hours a week. Well, you've now had your pay cut in half, and you're hurting. Can you get benefits? And the answer is generally that the Department of Labor wants to help you if they can. And as Secretary Washington indicated, if your weekly earnings for those 20 hours, if those are less than $275, you're probably going to qualify for partial benefits. And if you get that, we'll talk about it in a minute, you'll get the extra $600. For employers, Department of Labor is asking if there's any employers on the call to help your employees file their partial unemployment claims. They've added a new great tool online I saw yesterday for bulk filing of partial claims. Again, they're really trying to help employees in this time. But if you're an employer, you don't want to help, then they ask that you file Form BIN 241, waiving your employer's right to respond to the claim for benefits. All right, next slide. All right. Here's an interesting note that I found on the DOL's website that just, I highlighted that top part. It says you still have to get partial unemployment, you still have to be attached to the employer. You still got to be on their employment rolls. And then you don't have to make 275, at least 275 plus 15. If you make more than that, you're not going to get the benefit. Next slide. All right, so here we go into the CARES Act and to some of those provisions that Secretary Washington was talking about. The federal pandemic unemployment compensation, it's a great thing. You get an extra $600 in addition to any other benefit that you get. You don't have to file a separate application for that. And like I said, last week, Alabama Department of Labor started paying that out. And when they did that, go to the next slide. Last Friday, I'm not sure if this is going to be distributed to our participants or not, but again, it is on the Department of Labor website. It's kind of tough to read, but it's really a comprehensive chart that shows you the circumstances in which you'll either be entitled to regular unemployment, whether you'll be entitled to pandemic unemployment assistance, $600. It goes through it all. So if you can go through that chart, if you can find it online, it's in one of their press releases. It will really help you determine what your rights might be to possibly get additional benefits in this time. All right, next slide, please. All right, so FPUC, this is the benefit that gives to individuals that have exhausted their regular state unemployment benefits. And so what does it do? I've given you a reference there. If you guys are law nerds like me, the Department of Labor issued a program letter generally talking about FPUC, but didn't give a lot of detail. Interestingly, it's supposed to run through July 31st, but at least the Department of Labor's regulations say the last week that it's going to be paid is July 25th. So that's something we'll all need to look at. The state can't charge employers for these benefits. For those who are in need, it's disregarded as income, so it won't affect your Medicaid or your S-chip eligibility. And here's the neat thing. Oh, I apologize. I got this all wrong. This is the $600. This is the good thing. If you get $1, you get the entire $600. So I apologize. This is $600. Again, the $600 doesn't affect your Medicaid or S-chip. Now, if you do owe child support's going to get deducted from that, and it is going to be reported as taxable income. That's all things that the U.S. Department of Labor has said. So $600 will be income to you, but it is at least something that can be used at this time. All right, next slide, please. All right. This is the 13 weeks of exhaustion. So again, basically, if you were already receiving unemployment benefits in the year and you've gone through them all, and normally you wouldn't be entitled to additional unemployment, the federal government's going to step in and provide funding through the Alabama Department of Labor for an extra 13 weeks. And then yesterday, the Department of Labor said that it's going to start processing applications for this extra 13 weeks. It's going to start that on April 20th, which is 4 days from today. I guess that's next Monday. Next slide. Okay, pandemic extended unemployment compensation. This is potentially 39 weeks of additional benefits, and it's payable, like Secretary Washington said, to all kinds of people who ordinarily wouldn't be entitled to unemployment compensation. It's a great benefit, and essentially, as I understand the program, the state will calculate as though you were eligible for unemployment and determine your weekly amount, and then you'll get $600 on top of that. The Department of Labor is requiring Alabama to identify and notify individuals eligible for these benefits. I'm assuming that's what Secretary Washington was referring to when he said you would get a notice in the mail. As soon as you get it, man, you got to turn that in quickly. And then the Department of Labor will issue you a determination on whether you actually do qualify for these benefits, and potentially you've got redetermination and appeal rights from that. Next slide, please. Then there's pandemic unemployment assistance. That's the 39 weeks. Those will start getting processed on April 13th. I've just really screwed this presentation up. If you get that, you also get the $600. All right, next slide. All right, this is the United States program letter, the Department of Labor's program letter on PUA. It's payable either as full or partial unemployment. You can't be able to work or telework. If you're working or teleworking full-time, you can't get this assistance. There's 10 qualifying reasons for it. The two most applicable ones, generally a bunch of them, are what I call direct impact from COVID-19. You've got it, a family member's got it, there's a quarantine order that applies to you. That's sort of a general set of them. Another one is if you're the primary caregiver and you can't work because your child's school or daycare facility is closed for COVID-19. And then the other big one will be is if your employment is closed as a direct result of COVID-19. Like Secretary Washington said, that's going to be retroactive to February 8th. And then the last week payable for those benefits is December 26th. All right, next slide. All right, so how do you get your PUA? You got to be a covered individual, which means that you're not entitled to regular unemployment. You've exhausted rights or benefits, you're self-employed, you're seeking part-time employment, or you have insufficient work history to normally get regular benefits under the state system. Next slide. All right, and again, just like PEUC, Alabama's got to identify everybody who's eligible for it, give them notice, and then there's got to be prompt determinations of those claims. Next slide. All right, now, this is probably one of the biggest issues to those individuals who are looking for unemployment and are looking for help with unemployment. Secretary Washington didn't really address this issue, but it's clear when you look to the publications from the United States Department of Labor and from the Alabama Department of Labor that everybody's really concerned with unemployment fraud. And particularly the concern that somebody who starts getting, say, that extra $600 a week isn't going to return to work if an employer offers it. Because what you're going to see here in the next few weeks is employers are starting to get what you might hear as the Paycheck Protection Act, the PPP loan. They're getting these loans that are designed to give money so they can hire you back. So hopefully y'all are going to start getting phone calls saying, come back to work. And if you get offered to return to work and you refuse to turn to work, but you still keep taking that $600, potentially you could be committing unemployment fraud. So I would say just treat this situation carefully. If your employer calls you and offers you your job back, either take it or notify the Department of Labor that you're not entitled to the benefit anymore. Otherwise, you could have some really serious problems if they prosecute anybody for fraud in the future. So I think those are the end of my slides. Again, I really appreciate the opportunity to present today, and I'll stick around for questions later.
Thank you both for the information you've shared. We do have a few questions. Either of you feel free to take them on. So our first question is, so what happens if someone who was already on receiving benefits, but their benefits got suspended? It says they got a notice that it was suspended. Are they now eligible for the added 13 weeks to receive the additional?
So this is Robert. I don't want to put any words in the Department of Labor's mouth, but my understanding of this is sort of twofold. First of all, it depends on the reason for suspension of your benefits. But generally, if it's a suspension as opposed to exhaustion, the short answer is I'm not sure. But the DOL has been so really good saying, look, communicate with us. We want to give you benefits if you're entitled to. And so my gut feeling is you probably would get the extra 13 weeks, but again, it's going to take a few days before they start processing.
Thank you. And so our, sorry, our next response, so an employee submitted their own claim due to reduced hours 2 weeks before their company actually furloughed, and they're receiving a message saying the payment is stopped due to vacation, holiday, sick leave. Do they need to file an additional claim for those 2 weeks? Or is it because of the system issues thus far?
So it's hard to know. I mean, so if you are getting any kind of vacation pay or sick leave, that can affect your eligibility for benefit. So even though you might be furloughed, what's happening is a lot of employers are paying out paid time off or vacation leave even while you're sitting at the house. So if you're getting that amount and it's more than that, $275, $290 a week, then you're, as I understand the rules, you're probably not entitled to the benefit. But if you're making less than that amount, then you probably do need to reapply for all weeks in which you made less than the $275.
Thank you. All right, so we had a question. So if you're self-employed, now that they're eligible and they're out of work, but they get paid into their LLC for a job that occurred beforehand, but now they're just receiving the payment, would that factor into their unemployment?
So this is Robert again, and Secretary Washington, anytime you want to jump in, it looks like he's still muted. Let me know. He knows more than I do. But with regard to the LLC issue, yeah, I mean, I think the question is, what are your weekly earnings, right? So generally, if you got slow pay, no pay, and you're not receiving any income in a particular week, you're probably entitled to benefits that week. But if you do get a slow pay in and it comes in and it's more than that $275 amount, then you might not be entitled to unemployment for that week. So it really is based on a week to week, how much you're getting in as income in a particular week as to whether or not you're entitled to benefits.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I felt like I was muted, but anyway, to add to what Robert had just mentioned, some of these questions are really technical in nature, and before I can respond in a very technical way, I would strongly suggest any specific questions that you get those to Representative Daniels, and he'll email me those questions. That will allow me to sit down and talk with my legal team, look at it, judge it, base it against what the federal rules suggest, as well as what our state rules are, and then we'll put those responses back out.
Yeah, and this is Robert again. Yeah, and like Secretary Washington said, this stuff is very technical, and I am giving general answers based upon my review of the law. I will say this: I should have given this disclaimer at the start because you've seen it on all the TV commercials. No representation is made that the quality of my legal services is superior to that of any other attorney in the state of Alabama. And on top of that, my law firm requires me to say, I'm not a lawyer for anybody that's on this phone call. I'm giving general observations of the law. This is not legal advice for anybody to rely on today. So now that I got those out of the way, Secretary Washington, thanks for everything you're doing to help us.
No, thank you, Robert. I think you did a wonderful job in terms of your presentation and your outlook of these new rules that's been handed down by USDOL.
Thank you. And I will say, going back to what Secretary Washington says, we do have an email account. So if you do have specific questions that we can get to Secretary Washington for you, our email account is askAHDC@gmail.com. So any questions that we get on to our email, we will forward them on to Secretary Washington.
Yep, and I will strongly suggest that you just send me one listing of all your questions so I can address them all at one time instead of them being piecemeal.
Noted, sir. Thank you. All right, so we do have, sorry, Jordan, could you go to the slide that has the email account on it? They're asking for the address.
Very first one, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the email account. You can submit all of your questions. All right, and so we did have one question. So a lot of people, so now that are self-employed are now eligible under the CARES Act, but they filed previously and it says they weren't eligible and they need to refile. So do they need to continue to refile, or is it just we're waiting for the system to catch up?
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, we sent out letters to all candidates in that particular group under what we call PUA. Again, I suggest once you receive a letter, it has some qualifying information that has to be filled out and then submitted back to us. And then we'll go ahead and pull the trigger. Once the claim has been completed, we'll go ahead and pull the trigger on sending out payment.
Thank you.
Kate, I think one of our members sent a question to the chat, Senator Figures.
All right, Senator Figures. I believe
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for these presentations. My question is an overall question. Is there any consideration going to be given to the workers who are out here continuing to work through this pandemic to keep our economy going? You know, you have people who are unemployed who've been sent home, and some of them are making more money than they would normally make, when we have workers who are on the front lines still out there in our retail establishments and so forth, who are making the same thing that they made before this pandemic. So will there be any kind of consideration given to them getting, I think they call it a hazard salary or compensation somehow?
Representative, I'm not aware of any program like that that's in existence right now. If I'm updated on anything along those lines, I'll be more than happy to get that to Representative Daniels.
I'm sorry, this is Senator Vivian Figures.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Senator Figures, it's Robert Lockwood. I haven't heard about anything like that either. And my guess would be, just given the way that, you know, Alabama's usually fairly conservative when it comes to employment law issues. So if that was going to come down, it would probably be another federal program. And I've got a pretty good network of employment lawyers around the country. I haven't heard anything about that coming down either. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, no.
No, I was going to say, even our medical professionals, you know, they're out there every day putting their lives on the line, literally. And I just think somebody needs to speak up for them with additional pay.
No,
and I think the state could offer to do that as well. But I'll send that question to the governor.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Senator Figures. Some of our next questions have to deal with people who have already filed for unemployment that may have been let go before COVID-19, who are filing for who are receiving unemployment benefits. Will they be eligible for that $600 additional, or do they have to be let go because of COVID specific reasons?
Yeah, the COVID provision went into effect on March 16th. So anybody that's been laid off as a result of the COVID virus after March 16th would be eligible for those benefits if they meet certain criteria.
Okay, awesome. And those who filed for unemployment before would just still be eligible for that regular $275.
Correct.
Okay, awesome. So one of the next questions is, I know this has to do more with the small business administration, but we saw today that the PPP program reached its limit. Do you all expect that to be an issue in terms of paying unemployment through businesses, or do you expect that to be any issue at all for unemployment? I know they're kind of separated, but that's a question I think people are having today with that news breaking.
No, it should not have any bearing at all from a benefit side from what we manage at ADOL.
Okay, awesome. So independent contractors, when it comes to them, they are now eligible, correct? Can we talk a little bit more about that? Because we have a lot of people who are independent contractors who have either said their claims are still being denied. I know that there was that April 10th opening date for those self-employed to start filing for unemployment. So can we just elaborate a little bit more about the self-employed process, and if those who have been denied earlier, if they should expect to start seeing those approved
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Alabamians who file for benefits may receive a notice that they are ineligible for benefits, even though they may be eligible for those benefits. There will be a document. In fact, we mailed out 60,000 documents this week. And again, we asked those individuals to fill out the documents, make sure they respond and complete those documents with all factual information, get those back to us, and that moves that process through.
Okay, awesome. And a specific technical question here, do people use their EIN number or their social security number when they're filing for the claim?
That's a little technical right there. Make sure you add that to the list of questions that get forwarded to my office, okay?
Okay, perfect. So is there a certain income threshold that if people made a certain amount and they are laid off, that they might not be eligible for unemployment?
If an individual is laid off through the COVID-19 pandemic through no fault of their own, they will be eligible for the max weekly benefit on the UI side of $275 plus a $600 weekly stimulus that was signed off on by the CARES Act.
Okay, awesome. And I think maybe Representative Daniels or Senator Singleton, are there any questions from you all at this point?
I don't have any questions. Do you have any questions, Senator Singleton?
And he might still be muted.
Okay, well, we're waiting for him to unmute. So we'll, one other thing, my claim hasn't been denied. It just says my monetary determination is 0. So how do you know if you're denied? Does that mean you're denied or?
No, no, does not. Again, as I mentioned, they will be receiving a letter. They need to fill out that letter, complete the letter documentation, send it back to us, and we'll move that process forward.
All right, so it looks go ahead.
I just want to really say with the Department of Labor, I will tell you that when I look at the news from other states, some states have not even started issuing the $600 a week. And so for our Department of Labor, I think that folks may get frustrated with some of the things, but they are doing the best job of any state that I've seen in dealing with this and responding quickly. So Secretary should be applauded for that.
Well, Representative Daniels, I really appreciate that. And here's one parting note I wanted to make. To your point, I mean, people are getting paid. If you look at the fact that we've already paid out over $188 million over the last 4 weeks, it's pretty phenomenal. And as soon as we got the guidance on the on the $600 stimulus, we paid out $120 million in stimulus relief. So people are getting paid. Now, I talked to some people who call our system, they get online, and they get through on the first try. It's almost like the lottery. But I'm not naive to know that there are still some people that are struggling to try to get into the system. And that's why we made some improvements to make sure we have enough people that can man the phones to receive those calls. But I still want to caution everybody on this. When you're on the line trying to fill out the information, make sure that information is as accurate as possible. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of calls we get are follow-up calls because that information, basic information, is not even submitted properly. And that just pushes back down the line even further. So I want to emphasize the importance of that piece.
Thank you. And we do appreciate all of your efforts helping us get through these unprecedented times. And I do want all of the viewers to know we do see your questions. And just so that we'll get you to the right resources, we're going to make sure that we put them all into an email to forward on to Secretary Washington. And we will be in contact with you to address those questions so that all of your questions are answered since they're more specific. So we want to thank you for joining us, and we're going to turn it over to Senator Singleton to close us out. Senator Singleton.
Well, thank you all for. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We hear you.
Yes,
Yes, I want to thank everybody for coming out, especially the two presenters, Secretary Washington, specifically with the information that you're giving. I know that we've been talking somewhat on a kind of regular basis and just asking questions. We also are both on the coronavirus task force, and the information that you give continue to be great information. So I too want to applaud you and your staff, and especially for bringing on that new call center. That is going. I think once you bring that new call center on, it's gonna exponentially help with the process. So again, I want to thank everyone, and hopefully you've got some great information so we can carry back to our constituents. And again, thank the two presenters, and to you, Leader Daniels, and your staff. We appreciate it.
And in closing, I'd like to also thank Robert Lockwood and the members for tuning in, and all of their constituents that's tuned in as well. Thank you. The hour it's 1:53, so this session is officially over. Thank you.